Hey up everyone, and welcome to Yorkshire Gamers, our Big Wargames podcast, and episode 14. Quick apology, this should have been out last Friday, but unfortunately work commitments meant I couldn't put it all together and get it all edited in time. Not a major problem, I only plan to do one episode in September anyway, due to some commitments I've got at the end of the month, so stick it in the middle of the month. Hopefully you'll enjoy this and you'll be ready and thirsty for some more episodes in October, which we will talk about in the back end of the show. Just to address a complaint I've had on the YouTubes on episode 7. Apparently it took an hour and a half to actually talk about the topic of the show, and I'm pretty sure that all of you who follow this now on episode 14 are aware that we don't actually talk about the topic until the end of the show, and quite often we don't actually talk about wargaming. We talk about cricket and various other topics during the course of the interview. So my apologies if you were expecting everything to be about Peter Gilder in this episode. If you want to miss out all the joy and chat and laughter and fun and everything that we normally do, and just want to listen about Peter Gilder, then I haven't finished recording it yet, but I would say about an hour and 15, hour and 20 in. Miss all that out. Don't worry about the guest and his background, just straight onto the Peter Gilder stuff. You're more than welcome. You can listen to him backwards through a fish tank for all I care, so long as you enjoy him. So let's get to episode 14. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Yorkshire Gamers, a Big Wargames podcast. And if you listen to the last episode, it was something a little bit different with some multiple short interviews and a Wargames problem page. But like an old pair of slippers, episode 14 is back to the recognised format. And today's guest's wargame history goes back to the late 1960s, and his blog page, the Independent Wargames Group, has been broadcasting his love for the hobby to the world since the late 2009. He's a man of many figures and responsible for inspiring yours truly into the world of the Italian Wars. So I'll blame him for that later on. My guest is also responsible for chronicling the history of one of our hobby's greats, Peter Gilder, on his own dedicated website. And we'll talk about that later in the episode. So let's give Robbie Roddis a huge white rose welcome to Yorkshire Gamers, a Big Wargames podcast. Hello, Robbie.
How are you doing? What can I do? I can't follow that, really, can I? Might as well just go home now, really. I'm certainly not as old as you made us sound, I can assure you. Well, actually, I am.
You are.
No, I am. No.
Have you ever done a podcast before, Robbie? Ever done anything like this?
I've been interviewed several times before like this, but very pressured situation. This is all right.
This is all right, isn't it? No worries at all. Well, we're going to talk about Peter Gilder at the end of the show and the website that I mentioned in the introduction. But the first thing I like to do is put our guests under a little bit of pressure and get them to tell me about their wargaming history. But instead of going on for hours about it, I'm giving them a little bit of a 4-minute challenge. So we'll come back and talk about many of the things that you mentioned in this. But are you up to summarising your hobby in 4 minutes?
I'll try.
You'll try.
God knows, once I start, you'll never stop.
Well, if there's a little, I've got a little timer on my tablet in front of me, and I've got the countdown music on there. So that'll give you a 30-second warning, and then DI Jack Regan from the Sweeney will come in and tell you to shut it if you carry on going too long. So right. In your own. So I'll press the button, Robbie. So off you go, mate.
I think because of a certain age, I was brought up in the late 50s, so I knew a lot of people who'd been through the war. So like a lot of war gamers that came later, they knew a lot about war. They'd seen the local people talking about war. We watched it on the television. We had the magazines, and I was fixated by war, full stop, which is actually quite a sad thing, really, when you think about it. So when I was 11, I was given a box of Foreign Legion Airfix, Foreign Legion, and that set us on the road to play with toy soldiers ever since. I mean, that's the only way I can describe it. And obviously, as Airfix built on with more figures and more different periods, it was inevitable I was going to have to do something with all the soldiers I had. So, strangely enough, I discovered wargaming. I was walking past a pet shop in a town near where I live, and in the window was a sign saying anybody would like to come and learn how to do wargaming. So, being a young bloke and full of confidence, I rang the guy and knocked on his door and went into his house. It's the stuff of murders, really, isn't it? So anyway, I was lucky enough. This stranger was actually a good bloke called Dave Natras, and he was a man about 10 years older than me. And in his loft, apart from the bodies, was a fantastic 10-foot square table. And on the table were 54mm Hinchliffe Zulus and British. But on top of that, he had other stuff there. He had 25mm Napoleonics, 25mm Ancients, and I'd never seen anything like it. It was an amazing sight. So as the weeks went by, we agreed to come every week, and we would play a game. And strangely enough, the 4 years I was going to his house, I never actually won a game. and at the end of the 4 years, I realized that I was never going to win a game, because Dave had this thing about the British Army were the best in the world during the Napoleonic Wars. So the rifles were elite. Yeah. And strangely enough, the Nassau infantry were classed as elite as well. So,
right.
Yeah. And then when we did the Ancients, he fought with Greeks and I fought with Persians. You had a Spartan army, which was invulnerable, right? Yeah. But the point was, he showed us the ins and outs, and from him, I was introduced to a couple of other people, and he went from there. And unfortunately, or fortunately, when I got a job in the police, I lost contact with him, and for several years I just played solo games by myself, and thought that was how you did it. Yeah. I didn't know anything about the clubs that were actually taking part and everything. And then one day I saw a magazine called Military Modelling, which was had just been released. That would have been, I think, 1972, 71, 72. And in there, a man called Charles Grant was doing a thing about Napoleonic warfare. And when I saw the setup, the photographs were all Peter Gilder. And I thought, this is how I should war game. Doesn't matter what else. And from there, I just seemed to want to build the same as Peter Gilder, and I wanted the same type of figures. And then I was lucky enough to come across a friend who I've war gamed with now for 50 years. He was a painter and decorator. And I got to know him through a third party, and he came to my house one day and just said, "Would you like the war game?" And I said, "Yeah." And we've done that ever since, just the two of us. As he's got older, he's got more cantankerous. But on top of that, he's also got more crafty about what he does and how he does it. So it's sometimes he springs a real surprise on you. John Reidy and I have gamed now for 50 years plus. And he was one of those people who could paint. He could paint like Peter Gilder. He had this ability. And I was able to think, well, I'm going to copy this. And he showed us how to do it. Unfortunately, he then suddenly announced after about 15 years, he was selling all his 25mm and was going into this new scale, 6mm.
Oh, 6mm.
So what do? Do you 6mm, right? In the end, I sold all my 6mm and 25mm and started again with 6mm figures. And that became our forte. We would put on big battles with 6mm figures, go to shows and try and get people interested, because there's obviously a prejudice against 6mm figures, probably still is to a certain extent, but how do you paint them? They're too small, blah, blah, blah. But so we tried to show that there was an avenue where you could enjoy it. And then about 15 years ago, he suddenly announced he was selling all his 6mm.
Oh, no.
And going back to 28mm. So I thought, what do I do now? So anyway, cut a long story short, I sold virtually all my 6mm, apart from the Napoleonics, and started again with 28mm. And started again, and then just continued after that. And but we've continued, the two of us wargaming and fighting various periods, and that's how it's been. It's right through. We'd obviously had other people we wargamed with, but it was usually two of us fighting each other in every sense of the word. But the most annoying thing is he's kept a journal right from the start.
Oh, has he kept like a tally of how many games each of you has won?
Everything.
Oh, no.
How it played out. the arguments, who said what to who. And I said, you got to let us read them. And he said, there's not a chance.
Yeah.
And he can tell you when he sold figures, when he bought figures, what I've sold, what he's bought, everything. He has a complete journal of our wargaming lives. Some of it, I just didn't even think what he's written about some of the times. Because when you start out, you tend to get fraught over very silly things, don't you?
Yeah.
Rules, or you've moved too far, or I don't believe what you threw with the right coloured dice, things like that. And he's kept it all. And I would love to read it. But
is he not going to release them like the government do after so many years?
No. His wife's got strict orders to destroy them upon his demise, and that's
dear.
But to be fair, I can understand that, because I'll be digging them up if they're as bad as he claims they are. So, but to be honest, I mean, you'll be the same. I found wargaming the best stress breaker you can possibly get.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt.
No matter how bad a job is, you can come home, put the light on, and paint some figures, and it just takes you out of wherever you've had and into an area where you can it's just lovely, and that's what a hobby should be about, really, shouldn't it?
Without a shadow of a doubt. So you've gone well over your 4 minutes there. So, but don't worry about that.
Sorry.
You were in full flow. So I just let you go.
Oh, sorry.
So is that your main gaming outlet then, or do you go to a club as well?
I've never been a member of a club. I mean, Durham City's had a club since the 60s. It was one of the first war games clubs in the country. And the guy who organized it was a man called Derek Sharman, who his name's
popped up a couple of times. Yeah, he was
a trendsetter, terrible businessman, like a lot of war gamers, but very innovative. He set up a club. He organized a big war games show every year. I never felt comfortable in a club, and I don't know whether it was because I didn't want people to know that I was a war gamer.
Yeah.
Or to be honest, thinking back, it's probably more to do with the fact that the people there came from a totally different background to where I came from, and they're a bit more intelligent than I was. So so there were people who had actually gone to university and done things and knew a lot of history, and I was still learning.
Yeah. And
I mean, obviously it's changed now. I would just go anywhere, but it's been a good club. It still survives. It's done well, but never been a club member. Hence the title Independent Wargames Group.
Independent, yeah.
There's a reason for that. What happened was, I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but the Wargames Research Group used to virtually control the whole of the Wargames firmament. The rules, some of the rules were good. Yeah. Some of them were bad. But everything was Research Group. And it was just like a childish blow. It's saying, we are independent. We're not part of your group. It was pathetic, really. But because, I mean, obviously it's been replaced by other big groups now. And
all the different types of mafia have taken over the game.
Yeah. Like the warlord.
Yeah. So have you got a setup at home, or where do you do your gaming?
I'm going to have to confess to this. Yeah. I always, obviously, everybody dreams of a war games room. And we progressed. John and I used to war game in his loft, in his tiny loft.
Yeah.
And if you stepped off the thin boards, your foot would go through the ceiling.
Ah, right.
And then what happened was, when I finally bought a house, I was able to get a garage built, and we war gamed in there. But before that, we used to war game on my sister's bed. She went to university, and we used to war game on this bed, and it was freezing. There was no central heating in the houses then, and it was freezing. and if you pressed down on the bed too much, the figures would fall over and fall off. But now, my wife and I built our own house 9 years ago, and the understanding was that when we designed it, there would be a room for wargaming.
Oh, brilliant.
So what I've got actually is a wargames room and a bedroom with 2 beds in case somebody wants to stop over. Right. Yeah. So it's a war game annex. And so I've got a 12x6 table now. So there's 2 of us on a 12x6 table. It's a bit big sometimes, but it's a good setup. Trouble is, you always want bigger, don't you?
Yes, that's true. That's true.
I mean, how many figures can you put on a table? And I've got a good setup. Let's put it like that.
I think a lot of people who've been on the
saying?
show have built sheds and converted garages. And Colin, do you know Colin Ashton? He's up near you.
I do know him very well.
Yeah. He's sort of built an extension purpose built onto his house as well. So I don't. You're not alone in doing that. I don't think.
No. But the thing is, as you get older, you in theory have disposable income, and I could have bought a nice car, but instead we thought we'd build a retirement home, and on the top I'll have a hobby room. The only thing was, and when we first moved in, I moved everything into the room. So we had the 12-foot table, we had a paint table, and I had my book collection, and I collect magazines. I had my magazine collection, and I put them all in there. But on top of that, I had over 200 2-foot square terrain boards.
Wow.
Right, which slid under the table. And then one night, just a couple of weeks later, I heard this terrible crack. And I mean, honestly, I thought it was being an explosion. And anyway, when I switched the light on, the roof, the ceiling had sagged.
Oh, God.
And so I had to run upstairs. And get all the boards out. And I rang me builder, and I said, what's happened? He says, well, what have you got in the roof? He said, you've got the biggest span you can possibly have on a ceiling.
Yeah.
What have you got in the middle? It's obviously you bent the support. So I had to take all the boards out. So there was 200 boards that had to be taken out and put in the garage. I just gave them away in the end. It was real sad. I had to give them all away, and nobody wanted to buy them. So I just gave them away. But it was a lesson. So now I worry about how much weight I can put in there. So I tend to spread it around the house now, you see. So
well, that's a good cautionary tale, because until you start thinking, you pick a tray of 28mm figures up and you think, bloody hell, that's a bit heavy.
Oh yeah.
And then you think there's 30 or 40 or 50 or whatever of these, and you multiply that together. Yeah. They're probably houses designed for having a bit of furniture and maybe 4 or 5 people in them with a bit of tolerance on top. And then you stick a load of 28mm figures on it.
So you've got to remember is that the architects calculate the weight just as a roof with an empty space. Once you start piling in, each MDF board was 2 foot square, and you have 2 or 3 of them and they weigh quite a bit. You multiply that up to 200 and you're talking a lot of weight. But on top of that, I also have a very big magazine collection. I love collecting Wargames magazines. It's something So of course there's thousands now, so you're thinking that's a lot of weight. And then the books, and then you get a short, fat guy standing on top of that. You're talking weight, what do you do?
That maybe a wargaming related building company is a decent business proposition where you could give advice to people who are building wargames rooms and on weight distribution and the like.
To be honest, because Colin's he's on the ground, he still complains it's not big enough. You're all wargamers are everything. They all want as big as they can get, and then some more. Do you know what I mean? It's terrible. I mean, we are really big children, and it's just I want more. Yeah, I want bigger. At least I do. It's very sad.
Oh, there's nothing wrong with it at all. That's what this podcast is based on. Is middle-aged people wanting more Wargames figures. So, what's your sort of go-to? What's your favourite periods? Your favourite scales?
It was Napoleonics. I mean, I think a lot of us were brought up on them. I still enjoy reading books about Napoleon, and I still enjoy reading about the war. I was just thinking the other day, I've got enormous Napoleonic armies in 6mm. I've never used them 5 years now. They just sat there, and I've got every nation. The actual thing was the ambition was I was wanting to put on Leipzig in 6mm at a show. So I built the armies. The armies are there. Never been used. When we started building the house, I'd only got halfway through the terrain boards, and I thought, I haven't got time. And I never did it. I never fought Leipzig in 6mm. So, and then it changed. Blucher rules came in, which I discovered were really decent. So I switched a lot of the stuff that I had on the old volley and bayonet basis into Blucher. And then I fell out of love with Blucher, and I was stuck between two different rules then, So seeing that, I reverted back to volley and bayonet rules, and they're so clever for a simple set of rules that I still enjoy the concept of them, So that's good. But I sold all the Blucher rule books and all the cards and everything, But,
what sort of scale were you looking at with your Leipzig then? The project that never got done, how big were you looking at doing it, table size and figure wise?
Well, I was doing it on brigades. So each brigade base would have 18 strips of figures on. So you're talking about 60 figures a base.
Yeah.
And then you work out, you do the maths for your brigades and the cavalry and everything else. So you're talking at least 12, maybe 14,000 figures, Yeah. And I have them. I just have them sat in boxes. Yeah. But then what happened was in the 80s, a beautiful, what I thought was beautiful, Italian Wars Army, Cesare Borgia, sold it. And then when we went back to 28 mils, I thought, I'm going to have a Borgia army again. And luckily at the time, they were starting to bring out the new Borgia series that fizzled out, which was a shame. And so the inspiration was there straight away. So I started again. And unfortunately, I then built on a Venetian army, a French army, the Imperialist army, the Spanish army. And then I thought, I think I've got enough now. And then I added a bit more to it. And then what happened was I was lucky enough. John had a Renaissance Turkish army in the 80s, fantastic. And I located where he'd sold it. And I went to see the guy who bought it, and I was able to get it back. So I then started building a Turkish army. I've got a big Turkish Renaissance. But then after that, of course, I discovered the American Civil War, which is something I'd never gamed in.
Yeah.
So I then started a 28 mil American Civil War army, both sides. Thought I'd better have both sides. And then after that, it then got into ancients. And of course, luckily with the plastics coming out, it was even better, Victrix and Warlord. I thought I must have an ancient Persian army, and that's when it's really spiraled out of control.
Yeah, because you can't have a small ancient Persian army, can you?
No, you can't. It's impossible. It's impossible. And then I did a lot of research on the successors, and I'm now building up a successor army. But in the meantime, Andy Callan had brought out his, never mind the bill hooks.
Yes, yeah.
There was the roses. So I've got what should have been a very small project is grown into a pretty large Wars of the Roses army. Anyway, I'm going tomorrow down to do a tournament with Wars of the Roses army.
Never mind the bill hooks event. Where's that being held?
Derbyshire. So that should be good. I hope so, touch wood. I don't like doing competition games. I can't handle the competition, I think. I don't know. It's more of a fun thing. And to be honest, Andy Collins is a great bloke. And so I'm looking forward to getting an explanation for some of his new ideas and seeing where he goes with them, and take it from there.
So is it quite a big event? I've seen it mentioned in a few places, and a friend of mine, Chris Breeze, who was on the last episode and who was on the first episode as well, I think is going down as well because he's big into his War of the Roses.
I think there's only about 16 people going. I'm going to stay down, have a few beers, and then just have a day's game, and that's how I like it. No, the Wars of the Roses is a great period. It's a fascinating period, but it's never really been covered properly, I don't think, by wargamers. We never seem to have a specific set of rules that captured the period. And to be fair to Andy, he's done a pretty decent job of, I don't know, just a bit of it feels like it.
Yeah, it's definitely as a period. It's had a, and I don't want to say Renaissance because it's before the Renaissance, but you know what I mean. It's had a resurgence. There we go. Let's not get me periods mixed up. But we've had the Perry figures, plastics, and never mind the bill hooks, which was massive, I think, because it came out as a freebie in one of the magazines. And then there's another set called Test of Resolve, I think they're called, that I've seen kicking around as well. So it suddenly seems to have come back to the fore, the Wars of the Roses.
Yeah, well, obviously it came during lockdown, so it was perfect. It was a perfect project for that, for then, because you didn't need a lot of figures to start with. And but I can't stop once I start painting. So I just carried on. And funny enough, I've just took a delivery of some more figures today, and I don't need them. I enjoy painting them, so I thought I'll have some more.
So do you paint them base and do everything yourself, or do you buy painted stuff in?
That's the one project I haven't mentioned: English Civil War.
Right, go on.
And what happened was that I saw there was a gentleman selling some English Civil War regiments about 3-4 years ago, and they were all Peter Gilder figures that he'd had in the army. And I thought, these are fantastic. And John and I used to do English Civil War many years ago, and I thought, I'm going to have old school English Civil War armies.
Nice.
And I said, I'll only have 10 units aside. It'll only be a small project. So I'm now up to, I can fight Marston Moor easily now that I'm painting the Scots. But so what I did, I painted a lot of them myself, but in order to pad them out, I started buying in badly painted units or poorly painted units. And I was lucky enough when poor Stuart Asquith died, some of his warrior English Civil War regiments came on the market.
Right.
So I bought them and I thought, well, I can't really paint them because they were painted by Stuart Asquith. So I've rebased them there in there. And then I got some really, really old minifigs, and I rediscovered the love that is minifigs. And thought, these figures are really cute, right? So I repainted them. So I've got poorly painted figures repainted and well-painted old figures rebased, and it's a big army. It's big armies now, I must admit. It's quite sad.
Have you any idea of a total figure count?
I'll just check the door. I have no idea, and I daren't count them. I'll be honest. And it's not through false modesty. If I counted them, I think I would frighten myself. I haven't got as many as I used to have, but I've got more than I should have. Right?
Yeah, that's a good description. I like that.
I wanted to go back to Charles Grant, the war game. Which was the book that started everything for me. It's fantastic. So I decided to do 7 Years' War, which I'd never done in my life, but I wanted figures that looked more old school. So it was a gentleman called Steve Heselwood who produced a series of figures called Pax Britannica in the 80s. Fantastic guy, fantastic sculptor. He was a policeman, a right jackal lad, but a fantastic talent. Honestly, a right jackal lad. And he produced this range of 7 Years' War figures where they were all in march attack poses. But the only place you can get them now is in America. And they only come in bags of 36. So all my 7 Years' War regiments are 36 figures.
Well, obviously.
And all my cavalry regiments. And all the cavalry, because it comes in bags of 24s. I mean, Steve Heselwood was a genius in a lot of respect. Other people have copied his style over the years. And but unfortunately, he went to America and then died prematurely. But he was quite a guy and quite an amazing guy. He was the one. Have you ever seen any of John Reidy's paint work in modeling? If you go back into some of the early miniature war games magazines or the illustrator magazines, there'll be the odd thing of John Reidy's figures. Beautiful figures, all sculpted himself and then painted by a friend of mine up in County Durham. And he produced a book about 6 years ago. This fantastic book full of all these units. And John Reidy and Steve Heselwood learned off each other about how to make these figures. And they're all anatomically correct. Faces are very, very, just really lovely figures. But there's not much movement in them. They're all just march attack. So I have lots of them as well.
That gives it that classic old school look, doesn't it? That all one pose in a regiment.
Yeah, it's fantastic. See, this is the thing, I know we touched on Peter Gilder. Wargamers, a lot of wargamers, if they come into it, don't know about the people who came before. It's sometimes nice to know what came before. Then you can either learn not to do the same mistakes, or you can pick some ideas up that you can then snaffle and use again and say it's your own.
I've just thought of this idea.
Funny enough, I was jotting some notes down, and one of my very, very first games ever, I used playing cards to decide who'd killed who. I was only about 11, so Simon Miller and his playing cards, he stole that idea off me. He just didn't know it. No, but you know what I mean. I mean, I think. No, to be fair.
Do you want me to try and get a check off it?
No, thanks. Not. No, but it struck us. I thought it was a logical thing to do for a young kid. Why not? Why not do it like that? But it's there. You go.
I think there's very very little that's new.
So I have a lot of figures.
Yeah, I think there's very little that's new in Wargames rules. They tend to circulate around, and the ideas will be presented in a slightly different way, maybe, or in a slightly different order. But I think most of the time people have seen it before. We mentioned briefly your independent Wargames group. Is that just a group of one?
There are two of us.
Two. There's a group of two.
I'll tell you the reason why I had to have a name. John's fascinated by rules, and in the 80s, I convinced him to write a set of rules Napoleonic rules. I thought, well, better make them professional. So we took the name and sold the rules. And then from there, I got them to do an American Civil War set, which were honestly, they were great. I couldn't sell any, but I used to give them away at shows. And then when I discovered Old School 7 Years War, I convinced him to write another set, which actually got a review in one of the magazines.
Oh,
but
brilliant.
the only thing in the review, not really. The only
was
thing the review I noticed was that I'd used a very large font to write the rules. But the reason is that I couldn't read what had been written, so I put it in a larger font for the old people, you know.
Yeah, I think that's very considerate at the end of the day.
But on top of that, because we used to do a lot of shows, I used to always create a handout. So I used to have a nice title, what the battle was, you know, and give people free handouts and stuff like that. And I mean, we're never going to recruit anybody, but it was just say, well, this is where it is, and this is how wargaming's played, blah, blah, blah. And I think a lot of shows forgot what the show was actually about, which is really to try and explain to people. But of course, now the only people that seem to go to shows are other wargamers, you know?
Yeah.
Where in the 70s and I think the 70s and 80s, there was people coming and saying, well, what's this? How do you do this? So, you know, the people had a lot of interest. But of course, now everything's on the internet. But on top of that, I mean, you know, most kids go through the games workshop phase. So they think that's how you play war games.
Yeah.
I
think we at Leeds, we do a show called Fiasco at the Royal Armouries. And
you certainly do.
Yeah, we still get a reasonable amount of interested members of the public who've been to the museum. You know, I've seen a poster or a stand or something in the museum for our show and then come in and have a look round. So we do occasionally get people who are fresh to the hobby, which is always nice to have fresh people to talk to rather than people to argue about something you've done on your table or a button colour that's wrong or something like that.
To be honest, I mean, Fiasco I'm looking forward to going to Fiasco this year, but I love the location.
So you've got your Independent Wargames Group website blog. It's been going for quite a long time now. It's what, 12, 13 years. What was your kind of thinking behind the blog and all the stuff that's on there?
I'm going to tell you the truth. Okay. It was formed. My wife was very, very ill with flu one New Year, and we were meant to be going out on the drink, and I couldn't go out.
Yeah.
So instead of that, I put her to bed, went upstairs, and I thought, I'm going to have a go at this blog thing. I created this blog because I wasn't allowed to go and celebrate the New Year. But to be honest, I'd thought about it for a while, and I'll tell you for why. I think a lot of people think about wargaming. Well, at least I do a lot. And I like to try and think, well, you know, what can we make it better? How can we make it better? You know, what can we do that so more people want to do it? You know what I mean? And so I just try and make something, try and think about what I'm trying to get across, throw a couple of odd controversial points in it just to see the reaction. And I also found it was a great way to keep a record of what I'd been painting.
Yes, that's very
I found over the last 3 years, my memory's starting to really struggle. And I don't know whether it's too many blows to the head or too much drink. But I find that I really can't so I can go back to the blog and think, oh God, I did it then.
Yeah.
And I enjoy it. And it's nice. Through that, I've actually been, you know, people have got in touch and from there, you know, I built up, you know, a few people I would never have been in contact with, met them. Yeah. And one guy in particular is a lad called Jason, who was lucky enough to buy most of Peter Gilder's Renaissance collection.
Ah, right, yeah.
And he got in touch out of the blue, Jason Williams, and he got in touch out of the blue, and he said, I'm rebasing the collection. Would you like the spare figures?
Wow.
Right? Said, just tell us how much you want for now. And he wouldn't take any money. He wouldn't take any money. This is the best part about wargamers. You know, you share things, don't you? And so I used to get a small package with the odd figures in, and it was brilliant. You know, and it's just nice to have something. You think, well, this is being used at Peter Gilder's place. You know what I mean? And
that's absolutely fantastic.
And so the blog is really just grew out of being I couldn't get out of the house.
But you've kept it going, haven't you? You still fairly regularly post on there.
Oh yeah. Did you not find that lockdown's been a problem in the sense of you become quite introspective. Certainly I did. And I found that you didn't want to communicate with people because you thought, well, what am I going to say? I haven't been out the house. I'm sat here watching television. And so it's been quite difficult. The last 6 months has been difficult in because you haven't got much you can say, really, have you? I've painted these figures. I've read this book. And then after that, what the hell are you going to do? It's a social thing. Wargaming to me, it's nice to meet people and talk about, daft soldiers and I wouldn't paint them like that. You should paint them like that. It's stuff like that was good, and that's why the blog's more of a social thing now, Yeah. Although I must admit, I made the error the other week of saying I was never going to have Alexander leading my Macedonians. I was going to, because he was such a bad man. As a throwaway,
you started a fight.
I did start a fight, yeah, and it was just meant as a bit of fun,
Yeah.
He was a horrible, nasty little bloke, but he was still a great general, but he was still horrible, a great bad man. But we all have our favourites. We all have our people, that we don't like. Mine's Frederick the Great, but he's not a nice person. But there you go.
Well, I think that brings us neatly round to we've mentioned it briefly as well, but that brings us neatly round to one of our joint friends, Mr. Cesare Borgia. You won't have known until today, but it was your Wargaming the Borgias sort of sub-site, isn't it, of your independent Wargames group website that got me going again on Italian wars, because it was something we did hugely in the 80s in 15mm, and started on, well, I'd say started. I'm up to about 1,000, 1,500 figures now. So where does your love for that period come from?
I'm embarrassed to say it started with the BBC series in the 80s. You'll have been a tot, but basically
no, I'll have been a teenager or early 20s.
All right.
Then.
Well, I've got the original television series, and I'm trying to name the actor. The actor who played Cesare Borgia was brilliant, And
yes, I can see his face.
He had his detractors.
Yeah,
he had his detractors, but he also had people who praised him. But when I started reading around the subject properly, I thought, this is a really interesting man in a really interesting period. But I was a member of the Pike and Shot Society then, and I used to write little articles for it. So I started thinking, well, I'll do the Italian wars, but I'll do the Cesare Borgia part of it because it's a little bit different from the normal, French and Spanish. And it just grew from that. And I was lucky enough this time, I was introduced to a lad called Pete Smith, Pete's Flags.
Oh, yes, Pete, yeah.
And
he's currently painting me, he's promised me, a standard for Charles VIII at Fornovo. So I've done some command bases for it. And I've deliberately left the flagpole blank and sent him a photograph of it just to remind him.
Pete, I bumped into him and I don't even know how we got talking. He's a great big lad and he frightens the living daylights out of you. But, really, really brilliant. Anyway, cut long story short, I got talking about Borgias and he agreed to create a set of flags. But he's so pernickety. The research he did was fantastic. So, and I don't know if you've seen the flags. I don't know, but you'll have them.
I've used lots of them.
Especially I wanted a Borgia guard, and so I've got like the pike in the militia pike in the red and white, and then I've got his guard. It's got it all that. But then I'd been to Florence, and I discovered about the black band, the real black band, not the French one. Anyway, cut long story short, Pete had been in touch with an Italian professor. He got the proper standards, the information for the proper black band standards. I don't know if you've seen them with the devils on it.
The little devils on them, yeah.
Well, I asked him if he'd make some of them, and he did. And I thought, gotta have these as well. And of course, he does so many beautiful flags that you just got to do the blooming units to go with it.
He does, yeah.
But what a period,
Yeah.
So what started it? BBC.
Yeah.
The television program. It wasn't as earthy as the last series, the one where there was more people naked. But
the one that Sky did, the one that Sky did, yeah.
Well, they stopped, they obviously ran out of money and just gave up, which is such a shame. But when you read the books about him, he's a fascinating character. He's so unlucky that his father died at the wrong time. It's interesting, his bodyguard, who was his main advisor, when Cesare was ill, the Pope, the next Pope, captured his advisor and tortured him. And he refused to tell his torturers anything about Cesare. And the Pope said, "My first honest man, you can let him go." And so you think, well, obviously, you must have been some reason why he created loyalty like that. You know what I mean? So he's quite a character. I'd like to see your army. I'm intrigued now.
Yeah, well, you'll be able to see it at Fiasco. Hopefully, I'm putting a game on there because there's a few traders who aren't coming or have stopped in 2 years that it's not been on, and they're just using it as a bit of an excuse to have a little bit more space between everything in COVID times. It was never a packed show as it was anyway, but so I'm hopefully going to put an Italian Wars game on there, so you'll see me there in me Yorkshire Gamer t-shirt, and we can have a critique of me Italian Wars stuff.
28 mil.
28 mil.
No,
yeah.
no, I don't critique, honestly.
Well, it's all. I'll just say it's all your fault, Robbie. Anyway, so there you go, mate.
Well, I tell you what, I'm fixated by gendarmes. I've got more gendarmes than probably existed. But when in my first Borgia army, I had a unit, what was called Vulcan Miniatures, and they were these big. They were kit form. You put all the bards on piece by piece. You put the body on, and then you stuck the head in it. But they were very strange looking pieces, but when you put them together and paint them, they were fantastic. And Gilder, what Gilder used to do, being Gilder, he would plagiarize their figures and make his own, and they look fantastic. So I located some of these figures, and I've got a whole unit of these barded monsters, and they weigh a ton. So, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to go back, because they had loads of plumes and everything. It just, and you think, what on earth's that? But when you see them painted, they look great, and I like the sea gendarme, like Steel Fist.
Yeah,
I mean, they're absolutely phenomenal.
So just to finish off this introduction section, then, I like to get everyone to just kind of describe or talk about what type of wargamer they are, because there's different sort of sides to the hobby, and different people like different aspects of it. So I've broken it down into 4 sections, and that's wargamer, painter, collector, and historian. Are any of those 4 your main focus, or how do you see yourself spread out in those 4 different sections, if you like?
All 4.
All 4.
I sometimes wondered if I was more of a painter than a wargamer. And the reason is that I've always enjoyed painting. Didn't matter what it was. If I saw a figure that was nice, didn't matter what scale, and it looked nice, I would buy it and paint it. But I'm also obviously a wargamer. I like the tension in a war game, and when things go wrong, after a while it becomes quite funny. I find it.
Yes,
it's quite nice things. Honestly, sometimes when you're losing badly, you just think this is ridiculous, and it's quite funny. But when you win, your victories are much nicer because you don't get many. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, collector, definitely, because I'm lucky enough. When I said I had all these terrain boards, I swapped 100 of them for a chariot. Right?
Was it a big chariot?
One 25 mil chariot.
Yeah.
And it was a chariot that Charles Grant had painted, and it's on the front of his ancient war game book.
Yeah.
And I didn't expect it, to be fair, but Rob Young, who was the lad who took the boards very kindly, said, "Oh, I've got to give you something." I said, "Well, I don't want money." He says, "Oh, I've got this. It's from Charles Grant." I said, "I'll have that."
Yeah, too right.
But I've also been lucky enough. I've got I locate a couple of figures that John Reidy, Heselwood made when they were first starting out, and I've got them. I like them. And then I was lucky enough to get some of Peter Gilder's, just two units of Peter Gilder's gendarmes, and fantastic. And I just thought, this is great. And then I collect ephemera that belongs in war games history. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I like that stuff.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great to see that it doesn't end up in a skip somewhere, and that somebody's got hold of this. Some of the iconic units that you think about when you think about those old books.
Well, but basically what happened was there was a lad called Dave, and he knew Duncan, and when Duncan McFarlane, the late Duncan McFarlane, he went bankrupt, poor lad. You know, his company went under, and he had to move out of his house. His house was getting repossessed. So what happened was there was a call made. I'm going to have to get his name out in 2 seconds. It's very annoying. It's Dave Thomas.
Oh, Sorry, Dave Thomas from the shows, who takes the Perry stuff round.
Yeah. But Dave, anyway, Dave's, how would you forget his name? Anyway, long story short, Dave Thomas went to this house where Duncan used to live, and it was piled high with metal. Everywhere you went, there was thousands and thousands of figures. And the bloke who repossessed the house said, I've got a price for them to be weighed into a scrapyard.
Yeah.
What do you think they're worth? And Dave, he said, I couldn't buy them all. He said, but I got 2 van loads of figures.
Yeah. He
said, and thousands of other figures were then put into a bin and melted down. Oh. And I just thought, and you're just thinking, you know, Dave still hasn't sorted them. They're still in big boxes in his garage.
Wow.
Because you got that many. But the thought of all those figures just going, you're just thinking, my God, it's awful. And that really, I really worry about that. You know, you know, they're all going to go into a skip. Yeah, they are, probably. But getting back to your question, I used to like doing painting competitions at shows, Northern Military in particular. So I used to like painting, and I wasn't bad. I was never going to be the best. And I once came second at Salute, and I thought that was the pinnacle for me. Strangely enough, the unit I got second with was sold straight afterwards, went to America. But anyway, cut long story short, and then Duncan McFarlane got them back for all things. But anyway, so I like the paint. As I've got older, I've realised spending too much time painting, get more time gaming. Yeah. So I'm a gamer now.
Well, thanks very much for that. We'll take a quick short break for the audience there. It was a great introduction. Got to learn loads and loads there. And we'll be back in a minute when we have our usual second part talking about big games. So in the second bit of the podcast, we like to talk about big games, and not the sad demise, because I'm going to bring them back to the fore. So when you think about a big game, Robbie, what comes to mind? What does a big game mean to you?
I was lucky. In 2019, I went up to Glasgow for a charity Battle of Waterloo.
Ah, yes, I know about this. I didn't know you were involved in it, though.
So I painted up. You had to do a contingent. Yeah. And you could play, put your money in for the charity for the veterans, and I did an element of the Young Guard in 28 mil. And there was 22,000 figures there.
Yes.
Right. And there was 4 tables of 36 feet, and there was 80 odd people took part. No, that was the ultimate.
That's a big game. That is definitely a big game.
Yeah, that was a big game. That was an excellent game. To be honest, I was dreading it because some of these games become chaotic, but they ran it so well. My definition of a big game is I had to go back through the magazines that I've got, and in 1990, before you were even shaven. I'm in the Practical Wargamer.
Yes, yeah.
I'm in the Practical Wargamer, the Battle of Blenheim.
Yeah.
And I did, what I did was John and I wanted to do, Malburian was, so we did it in 6 mil, and we decided to stage the Battle of Blenheim on a table. The table was, I think it was 28 foot long.
Yeah.
And 6 feet wide. And we invited people to come and take a part. I was cheeky then, and I rang up a man I'd always admired called Charlie Wesencraft.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the proper pioneers of Wargaming.
Yeah.
And he said, "Yeah, I'll come." It was amazing. And I rang a guy called Paul Stevenson, who's wrote a couple of books, Wargames books, great lad. They turned up, and we ended up with a 6-a-side Battle of Blenheim.
Brilliant.
And it was fantastic. You know, it was. And then after that, once you get the taste for it, I wanted to do Austerlitz. So I hired a Durham Wargames group, and I put on a big version. It was about 30 foot long, the table of Austerlitz. And I've just having a look there. The French had 123 battalions.
They're going to be sort of 36 figures. Oh, 6 mil, yeah.
Yeah, but they're in 36s. And we used, John wrote a set of rules. And so we had I think we had about 12 aside, and it was tiring, mine. It was exhausting, but it was a great.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful experience. And then I looked through it, and Chrissy, Quattro Bar, Rob, and then I had this stupid idea to do Borodino.
Oh yeah.
And that was a killer, that one. And I invited Charlie Wesencraft again, and God, he's a horrible war game to fight
Is he?
against. Oh, he tortured us as a Russian. He absolutely. Oh, he's just awful. But I think we had 12 aside on that.
Yeah.
And each one had a role, and you give them a basic, you are so and so.
Yeah.
And you give them a little bit of an extra thing, like don't tell such and such that you hate them, or you build in a little bit of tension. And it was just a good laugh. But war games to me should be big tables.
Yeah.
Lots of figures, lots of eye candy, little. I like the little dioramas of things happening around you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's nice when you have something that's happening that's not part of the battle, but you can look at it and think, oh, well, that's interesting. You know what I mean? And if it's hanging a deserter or whatever, but this, you get all that in. I worry sometimes that the way wargaming's going, where they're going into smaller and smaller, battles, and most of them are skirmishes now, really, and they're very enjoyable, but they're not meaty for me. I like when you've seen somebody who's worked hard and put in a lot of figures that they've painted, and then you're fighting this lovely battle. It's brilliant. It's a great experience.
I think you've mentioned there quite a few of the things that make a big game really good. And some people have played in a big game and have had a bad experience. They've been on a flank and moved once every 4 hours or etc. So for you then, is it important that everyone's involved and everyone's got that little bit of a backstory, if you like, to make it more interesting?
I did a one of Aspen-Esslin, which is a real hard battle for the French. And, you've got to try and say to the Austrian commanders, you were trying to beat the French. You're not just trying to hold the French back. So some people would be classed as like rash, and others would be classed as, a little bit more timid. So would have different type of goal to achieve.
Yeah.
You were going to capture this town, and you're going to keep all of it.
Yeah.
You don't need to do any more. But the idea is to get each one involved, and then at the end you say, right, you didn't win your objective, you won yours. Type of this, and it's just try. I know exactly what you're going to say. I can remember going to I was lucky enough to go to a Donald Featherston Memorial Weekend at the Wargames Holiday Centre. We were fighting Napoleonics, and the two people on the flanks didn't get the move. The scenario just didn't allow them to do anything really. And I thought, you paid your money, you want to be part of it. You know what I mean? You want to be into it, and that's awful to me. You've got to be part of it. You've got to be part of the whole game and involved in the tension and everything else that goes with it. Otherwise, it's very frustrating if you're not. It's awful. But I think everybody's had a bad experience. I mean, I'm not going to name names, but many years ago, John and I were and other lad were invited to a big war game, Wagram weekend, 25-0 game.
Yeah.
And funny enough, we were using research group rules. I think this is probably what pulls against them.
Yeah.
And by the middle of day one, we were at the stage where somebody was going to be beaten up. This tension was so strong.
Yeah.
And it was like, it was awful. And at the end of day one, I just said to John, I said, we can't come back to this game. This is awful.
Yeah.
And it was just that there was a couple of people just didn't hit it off, and they were fighting against each other. You know what I mean? They were actually opponents. Best thing we'd have done was we'd separate them, put them at the other ends of the table. But unfortunately, it killed the whole game.
Yeah.
And it can happen, can't it, on a big game? You can get somebody who's not the wrong type of war gamer, but the wrong type of war gamer for somebody who doesn't like that type of war gamer.
Yeah.
It's do you know what I mean? It's,
because I found that generally with bigger games that you tend to have the people who aren't that bothered about winning, the ones who tend to want more of a laugh than a competitive streak, mostly because they're not picking their armies, they're not building to a points total. They're kind of sat down in front of a block of figures and go, right, this is what you've got. Go and stomp over that bridge or whatever. So I think that's got partly to do it. I think there's lots of different types of war games. I think larger battles tend to, obviously generalizing, tend to not have as many competitive players in.
It can spoil it. If you've got somebody who's not that interested, it can really spoil it. And you want somebody who's interested enough to want to play and really enjoy the experience, as opposed to just, I'll push these troops around and that's the end of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just, you've got to try and think about who to invite sometimes. But to be honest, I always wanted to meet Charlie Wessencraft anyway, and it was a great way to be introduced to him. And when I met him, I wasn't disappointed. He was just a wonderful bloke, an absolute diamond of a bloke.
Well, that's a great way of doing it. Just ringing him up and going, "Oh, do you fancy coming to this game?"
Oh, I was as cheeky as any. This is who are you? I said, well, you'll know when I see it. You know what I mean? And to be honest, shy boys get no toys. I did the same with Duncan McFarlane.
Yeah.
I didn't know him from anywhere, and I went to see him, and I said, Mr. McFarlane, I understand you used to know Peter Gilder. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, what was he like? What was he like? Well, I'll tell you what, ignore the show you're meant to be at. Well, just have a sit down. We'll have a bit talk about it. And to be honest, he was good as gold. And he was he was a lovely fella, but terrible businessman. But, like a lot of war gamers, starting out anyway. But I think we used to do 4 shows a year, John and I. And it as we got older, it's really hard work.
It is.
I mean, John's now 70, and I'm 65 now. And the last show we did was 2 years ago. We did an English Civil War. We said we would never do any more.
Yeah.
But we said, last time I said, no, we've got to do one. And I came back and I was exhausted.
Yeah.
And all I'd done was talk and play soldiers. And I was exhausted.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, maybe I can remember John Tuckey, who died just recently, and I can remember his games from the 70s and the 80s and 90s. These massive games, and the bloke he must have been tired out, knackered at the end of the day, because he had thousands of figures on the table, and it's a big commitment, but it's you want to do it, don't you? You've got to want to do it, otherwise you wouldn't do it.
I remember we used to go up every year to Edinburgh when we were younger, and that was a real chore. In that you'd be up at 4 o'clock in the morning. We'd get a minibus and drive round everyone's house and pick everyone up, and then try and get there and set up and game all day, have some tea, and then come back home, and you'd be doing 24 hours easily.
Well, did you used to go to the old one at Adam House, the one
where you had to go up all the stairs? Yeah.
I volunteered us to do that, but I thought I'm not driving up on the day of the show. Yeah. So I rang them up and I said I want a bed for the night, right? and I'm not paying. So they were very nice about it, to be honest. They were very nice about it, and they said, yeah, we'll get you somewhere. So I made poor John, who doesn't like to leave home, and we slept overnight on the floor but I made him go out drinking, right? And we ended up in the company of Trevor Dixon out of Dixon's Miniatures. He had his wife. We ended up absolutely slaughtered, me and her. We were absolutely scuppered with drink. But and you're thinking, the next day you're thinking, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have come up here. This is crazy. As we climbed the 3 floors and you put your game on. But you did it, didn't you? You did it because you wanted to go to this show. And to be honest, it was a great show. Claremore was a brilliant place to go. They were lovely war gamers. They were really good fun. And plus, I won the painting competition there, so it was even better. So
Well, I
You know,
remember, I
so
think we took a huge game, 28mm game of Culloden up there, which was fantastic
all
because we had
right. Oh, they'd love that.
they loved it, and there was loads of people going, that one there's my great grandfather or whatever, and then all the clans were named, so everyone was, and nobody admitted to being on the government side. They were all pointed to the Highlanders.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. Funny enough, I must have been inspired because I painted some foundry Scots, English Civil War Scots that won, and obviously I had a better chance if it was Scots. So so I learned a lesson there. But it's a good show but it's hard work. It's a big commitment, isn't it?
It is.
But
it is.
But to be honest, you meet some people that you're going to meet, at the next show. It's great. It's great. That's where I enjoy it. I miss it. The COVID's been awful for that. The social aspect's destroyed. It's terrible.
So with just the two of you normally then putting on those games, would you invite people to come along? Was that how you got your extra players? For
the big games, I'd send an invite out, or if I was at a show, and there was some people there, say, I'm going to do the big game at such and such. Would you like to attend?
Yeah.
And put an invite out at the time, you know what I mean? And sometimes you think, well, I don't know him. What's he going to be like to war game with? And to be honest, they're usually absolutely fine. Most people like wargaming will be good wargamers. And, they might not be the luckiest wargamer, but at least they enjoy the game. And that's the good thing. You don't mind. I'm not going to name a name, but I can remember at Aspen-Estlin, I gave a guy a command of the French in the island, Aspen-Estlin. And by halfway through the game, he suddenly started moving his troops off the table to the back of the table. I says, what are you doing? Well, we can't win this. I'm retreating. I said, and he just decided the French couldn't win, so he'll just retire all these troops. And I thought, but he was right. He was right in one respect, but as a game, he wasn't right. I said, well, you're going to spoil the game. Well, you can't win, and but
nobody wants to. Nobody wants to see lots of toy soldiers retreating, do they? At the end of the day, that's a great game. What's this called? The Retreat from Aspen-Estlin.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's terrible, But there you go. All I'm going to say was, if they ever organised another great game, Waterloo, I would thoroughly recommend it. Professor Tony Pollard, brilliant. Him and he, brilliant, absolutely. The whole weekend was so well done, even to the costume people. It was a brilliant idea, and we're an experience if you get the chance to do it.
The photographs of it were absolutely amazing, and I'm pretty sure there was something work related that I just couldn't get out of that stopped me going. And it's a real shame I couldn't make it. I've listened to Tony Pollard talk about it on a number of occasions, and not only was the cause fantastic, the reason why they were doing it, but the whole thing, as you say, seemed to be so well organised. And if you enjoyed yourself, it's hard enough getting a game and organising a game and keeping 10 people happy. But to keep 80 people happy, amazing.
Well, I was lucky enough because the other half of the guard had been painted by David Imrie, who I'd never met, but I've long admired his work. And what a cracking bloke! He was a really good bloke, but on top of that, God, what a painter!
Yeah,
absolutely amazing. Saxon Dog. And you see his stuff, you just think, you're an absolute genius, And,
he is very, very good. He had his own group on Facebook for a while, and lovely stuff. Very, very nice. So just to finish this little section off on the big games, then we kind of touched on this, that they seem to be going out of fashion, and people seem to be moving into the skirmish games, and for a number of reasons, but. Is there anything that you would say, or any advice that you would give to somebody starting out in wargaming, to not to push them towards, but to kind of shine the light on the bigger game?
I mean, I've always been inspired by watching films or television programs, and then thinking I'm going to read a book about it. So so to me, they don't seem to channel them into research.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be some stuffy book. There's some fantastic books out there written by really brilliant people. Duffy was a great example.
Yeah.
Colonel Elting was another one, who were really interesting. So I just think that if you could get people just to say, look, read the book, say what you think, or just read a chapter and go and watch the film. American Civil War, go and watch Glory or Gettysburg or whatever, you know, and it's trying to get them interested in something colourful. So, I mean, even Braveheart, which is an abomination as a piece of history, but as a spectacle, it's fantastic. It's just trying to get them hooked on something. And to be honest, I used to do a volunteering in a senior school, and the kids, they were all the troubled detritus of the county were there with huge issues, but they were fascinated by war, naturally, because they're all violent.
Yeah.
But to be honest, me and the teacher was excellent at saying, right, we're going to build a Tiger tank. But I want you to go away and read about, the war and around it. And they come back, sir, the Tiger tank was built in 1941, blah, blah, blah. And the point was, they then say, right, we're going to build a tank, and then we're going to play with them.
Yes.
And we'd have a simple set of rules. And to be honest, even the most villainous child was actually, would be interested for even a short period of time. It was a great thing. There aren't enough women in wargaming. There never has been, But it's a great idea to, if you could get a few more in and just say, would you like to take command of this group here? And I don't know.
No,
Who's got the answers?
I think there seems to be more interest generally across the board in sci-fi wargaming now, which seems to be where most people cross into historicals rather than via the Airfix route that we both did.
It's less of a problem doing fantasy and science fiction. Do you know what I mean nowadays? Because if you say I'm interested in the German army of 1941, you're now starting to tread down the path of, well, you're only a Nazi, or you're looking at things, and they forget the history part and they look at the, you know what I mean? I think some younger people are a little bit wary of, I'm interested in war, where it's easy to say I'm interested in science fiction or I'm interested in Games Workshop.
Yeah.
So it's more acceptable because I'm only killing something that doesn't exist anywhere. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I might be wrong. I might be looking at it too deeply. It might be because they'd never built a model in their whole lives. But my grandson loves building models.
Yeah.
And I insist on taking an Airfix model down. And every time we build it, he loves to hear about the history of it. You know what I mean?
Oh, fantastic.
So it's still there. Do you know what I mean? I painted boxes of 54 mil Airfix figures for him.
Yeah.
And he saw these are one of these. Oh, these are medievals. Or how do you fight with them, Grandad? And it's still there. It's just that obviously they don't have the opportunity now, do they? They don't have that avenue of where we used to get Airfix models, or frog models or whatever, and build them. Yeah. And then we thought we're going to play with them.
Yeah.
I used to set mine alight with lighter fuel. I you'd fire an air gun at them and shoot holes through them, but it was all, you know what I mean? It was just part of the thing. Yeah. Can you imagine a child now with lighter fuel? God almighty. we used to make because I come from a mine there. We used to make bombs, real bombs out of carbide. Carbide. We used to be putting carbide lamps. It's a gas.
Yeah,
it's in a form, and we used to get it from the pits, and we'd make it into a bomb. And when you threw it with an igniter, it used to blow up. Yeah, we blow.
Is it like a little like cake-like substance?
Yeah,
I know. Yeah.
Oh yeah. We used to blow it up, blow the soldiers up. You know what I mean? Can you imagine that now? Oh, I'm just going to throw a few bombs.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd be dragged away, wouldn't you? I mean, just the way we were. But the point was that's gone, isn't the imagination?
Yeah.
It's all about channeling them into here's a game on your screen. Yeah. Go play with that.
Yeah, it's a good way of reducing your number of figures, though, isn't it? If you've got too many figures, blow a few up.
well, I've got a confession to make. My sister used to have a fantastic collection of Britons.
Yeah.
And I chopped the heads off every single one with an axe as a child. And I've never, ever felt more guilty about a thing in my life. I just chopped them all the heads off. I executed them all.
Yeah,
there's something wrong there, isn't there?
If there are any psychologists listening to this who would like to give free counselling to Robbie, then contact me. Probably a good idea, mate. Probably a good idea.
Probably not. No.
Right. Well, so we'll take another short break and then we'll move on to the quiz.
I've got the answers.
Have you got the answers? Right. So
no,
here we go with the Yorkshire Gamer quiz, and the little warning beforehand that this is not a right or wrong answer, and it's how Yorkshire Gamer are you? So some answers some questions may be controversial and may lead to controversial answers. Not that we mean to upset anyone in any way, shape, or form. Honestly, right. So these are just yes or no, or one or the other answers, and it's based around what I think rather than what's actually right. And it's just a little bit of a fun break halfway through the show. So, are you ready to go, mate?
I was born ready. Come on, then.
Born ready. Right. So, first question: go big or go home?
Was that the question?
That's it. Yes. Go big. That's what we like to hear. Contrast paints, are they great or are they a gimmick?
I love them.
You love them?
They're not a gimmick. Yeah, I do. I think they're brilliant.
When you're choosing your paintbrush, and this may have regional bias in the question, when you're choosing your paintbrush, would you go for Winsor & Newton or Yorkshire Made Pro Art?
I like Winsor & Newton.
96 figures. Is that an army or a pike block?
That's a pike block.
It's
block. 2 pike blocks. That Come on. 96.
Somebody once said it's a small pike block. So yeah.
Oh, God.
6 foot by 4 foot table. Would you say that was a big or a small game?
That's a small game, but it's a nice game.
Nice.
Small game.
Small but well proportioned.
Yeah.
Would you prefer a points-based army or an historical order of battle?
Historical order of battle, every time.
When you're painting your figures, do you like to use a wet palette or an old bit of MDF to mix your paints on?
I've got a wet palette.
But do you use
I use a wet palette.
All right, brilliant.
Do you want to know, can I say?
Yeah, of course you can. Go on.
I was lucky enough, I went to meet a chap called Tony Runke, fantastic painter. He was the one who painted for Peter Gilder. Right. Yeah. Anyway, Tony, I interviewed Tony. I just want to know about Peter Gilder. And he showed us, all I've got is where you put your grass bits in, plastic boxes.
Yeah.
I cut that in half. You fill it with the kitchen toweling.
Yeah.
You then put a piece of greaseproof paper on top.
Yeah.
And just carefully fill the toweling in water. Yeah. And it keeps your paint. It keeps your paint for ages. As long as you keep topping up the paper.
Yeah.
Just so it's just wet. It's a brilliant system, and you can use it as a wet palette. You can use the paint wet, and it lasts ages. It's honestly, but I use a wet palette, or because I like the idea. Yeah. I just thought it was a great idea.
It's an idea that's never reached. It's never reached Yorkshire yet. The wet palette idea.
Well, it won't, will it? I mean, hell's teeth. As the roads reached Yorkshire.
No. We're still waiting for gas.
Do you know something? I worked in Yorkshire for 2 years. Yeah. They're the most cantankerous people I've ever met in my life. I thought the jocks were bad, but Jesus Christ, I nearly got into a serious attack with a bloke. It was a police sergeant, and I just made a joke, and he didn't like it. Yeah. I was just making a joke, and he just really took it to heart. He was very unpleasant. you take things to heart.
Yeah. We're not all like that. We tend to be very economical with words. Well, not me, obviously, but some.
And
we'll say things. If you can say it in 5 words or 20 minutes, they'll do the 5 words without a shadow of a doubt. And most of my career, I've worked up in the Yorkshire Dales most of my career, and I've been able to decipher quite complex situations from 4 or 5 words, and the intonation of how those 4 or 5 words have been said. It's a very, very different place.
Yeah.
Back to the quiz. Undercoating figures, are you black or white?
I'm both.
Both.
Seriously, I'll tell you exactly why. Majority black.
Yeah.
But if the figure's going to be bright, I'll put a white undercoat back on it, or a cream undercoat.
Very good. Another regionally biased question. You're offered a drink. Do you have Yorkshire tea or dirty mucky coffee?
I don't like coffee. I love tea, and I love Yorkshire tea. Love
brilliant.
it.
Excellent.
Not as good as Rington's.
Well, yeah. Well, we're getting into the Twinings argument there as well, aren't we? But yeah, very good Yorkshire tea.
I like proper tea.
Proper tea. Proper what? Without a bag. Leaf tea with the. That's proper posh, that. Yeah. So next question. You're putting a war game unit together. Do you like the figures to be tightly packed or socially distanced?
Tightly packed. I do like, yeah. It depends on it's a terrible question, aren't you? It depends on what it is. If it's a pike block, tightly packed.
Yeah, tightly packed. That's what we like to see.
You know, yeah.
I don't mind figures that are far apart from each other when there's an historical reason for it. But if you've got a pike block and you can ride 2 cavalry in between the figures, then
it's no good.
It doesn't look right to me. So you've got a choice of a game. Are you going to plump for a 2-hour club game, or are you going to go for a weekend monster game?
Oh, the weekend monster game, absolutely.
Monster game every time. Lovely. This is a question in honour of Nick Skinner from the Two Fat Lardies. Avocado, is it just posh mushy peas?
I've never eaten it.
You've never eaten it?
I've never eaten it.
Has it not reached your region of the country yet?
Well, I could say it's really bad for the environment, but the reality is it looks like dog sick, and I don't want to eat it. Right?
No, right. I'll put you in my anti-avocado camp then.
But I love mushy peas.
Yes,
with vinegar.
Mushy. Oh, perfect. Or mint sauce. We have them with mint sauce in Yorkshire.
Yeah, that's lovely as well. Yeah.
Question 13. Round dice. Are they allowed or banned on your table?
I'm a traditionalist. Square, nice cube.
Another honorary question here, a new question, and this is from David Marshall from TM Terrain. And you're going down the chippy. Are you having haddock or cod?
Haddock. Cod's a dirty fish. No, it is. I was told that by the Grimsby Wargamers that they won't eat cod because it's dirty.
Well, they know the fish at Grimsby, won't they? I didn't quite realise when David suggested this as a question how controversial it was going to be.
Well, I didn't either, but apparently cod eats off the bottom of the sea. Haddock eat. Right. Personally, I like them both, but I like haddock the best, I must admit.
Do you enjoy a good table and a set of rules? And by that, I mean like a casualty table where you have number of figures and dice rolled. Do you like that, or do you like the modern sets who are just throw the dice and kill?
I like the modern sets, to be honest.
You like the modern sets?
You know, I'm a bit of a trendsetter, really, I think. As the flares testify, I'm cutting edge.
Well, everything you wear comes back into fashion eventually, doesn't it? Is what they say.
Thanks very much.
I'm here in my old
Bradford. I'm here in my old.
I'm here in my old Bradford City top, so I can't say anything. 28mm figures. 28mm is king. Yes or no?
I suppose yes. No. Yeah.
We've briefly covered this, and I think I know what the answer is going to be. Unpainted miniatures allowed on the table? Yes or no?
No. Never. No.
Big question here. Bradford City or Leeds United?
Bradford City.
So we're up to question 19, just 2 to go. And another either or, and this is Yorkshire or the other place over the hill?
I think Yorkshire. I'm not running up your bottom. I like Yorkshire. You know, I do like it, especially North Yorkshire.
Yeah, perfect place. Yeah. And finally, Games Workshop, are they the work of the devil?
No, I don't think they are. I think some of the stuff they do is fabulous, you know. And
well,
very
75%,
expensive, that's the only problem.
75% is the result, which is very reasonable indeed, and not too much controversy in the answer.
I can throw some controversy if you want.
Oh, well, I'm sure we'll chuck a bit in the last section. So we'll just take another quick break, and then we'll be back for our main topic. So for the last section here, we're going to have a chat about a man who's inspired many, and he was a leading light in the early years of the hobby. And Robbie's put together a lovely website entitled Peter Gilder, A Life in Wargaming, to record the history and some of the memories of Peter. I'm sure most people on here would know, Robbie, who Peter was, but just in your own words, kind of describe him as a person.
Well, to be honest, that's why I did the blog about Peter Gilder, because you'd be surprised how many people don't know. And that was the first issue. But to me, Gilder, through his figures, which were then photographed and put in the first magazines, the Miniature Wargames magazines, that I think inspired hundreds, if not thousands of people there, to take up wargaming, because when you saw the stuff, you just thought, this is amazing. Even if you didn't like soldiers, the images were phenomenal. But on top of that, of course, you know, he was also promoting it all the time. He was very vocal in doing the big shows and going down to the famous Waterloo battles that he and then of course we had Battleground, which was I don't know if you had it in your area.
Yes, yeah, the 6-part, I think it was 5-part, I can't remember.
Yeah, 6-part. You know, and when that came out, I mean, that was just amazing. You know, looking back, I mean, I've watched them now and you're thinking, they're a little bit stiff. But the point was, at the time, you just thought it was fantastic. I mean, so Gilder, not only did he make figures, he could paint figures, and he knew how to actually put them out there as a spectacle, really. So people wanted to be part of it, really, you know. And then, of course, you know, you move on, and once he died, he was, you know, it's very easy to be forgotten. You know, unless somebody like leaves something as a reminder. If you don't have the magazines or you haven't read you know, any of the books where his figures are in, you're not going to know who he is. It's a worry sometimes that people like that are forgotten, you know, because he was an innovator in a lot of respect.
So was that the drive behind getting the website started then? Was it to kind of,
well, I'll tell you what it was. I'll tell you what the driving factor was. I went to see, I interviewed Charlie Wesencraft, and when I packed in work, I wanted to be able to talk to Charlie Wesencraft about the early war games, put them on my blog. And when we got talking, and it was, I tell you what, he's a fantastic guy. When we got talking, he mentioned Gilder and it was to do with Battleground. And what happened was, Peter Gilder wasn't the driving force. It was Charlie Wesencraft. And Charlie Wesencraft was, he was known then as a bit of a historian, even though he worked in the council. And he was approached to create this idea of a television program, but Charlie didn't want to do the presentation. So Peter Gilder, so he rang Peter Gilder. Gilder said, "Yeah, I'll do it. I'll go on television and I'll, you know, get the figures, blah blah blah." Except when they went for the, you know, you do like a TV test, you know, to see. Anyway, Gilder was so stressed he fainted over the table, right, and then slid down the table. And I thought, you know, this is brilliant, because he was always a very super confident man, the way, you know, he went on. But anyway, I thought, you know, and then when I was talking to Charlie, so you know, he was great. The figures were great. I thought somebody somewhere should have a record of just what he was about, you know. So I just wanted to do it. I just, you know, and I love his figures, just love them. So I wanted to do it. Although I've never met him, which is a real shame. It's a real pity, that. But there you go.
So you've covered a lot of the things there that he's known, that I know him for, and people who have got an interest in the hobby. He was a designer of figures as well, wasn't he? He would make figures. Right.
Well, this is the thing, right? I mean, when I started digging and asking some of the people that you know, Peter Gilder was one of these people, clearly, who was a really generous soul. But he had another side to him, right? Like, and he was a bit of a jackal lad.
Yeah.
And I had to check up on this. And what it was, do you know how he started wargaming?
No, I
Basically,
don't.
what
I
happened
just,
was
I was. It was in the 60s. That's all I know. And I don't know much more than that.
in the 60s. God. Anyway, what happened was he used to he used to fly airplanes, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then he went to become he worked in I think it was BAE. But
Yeah.
he used to fly airplanes, but he was a bit of a daredevil. And he had a motorcycle and he broke his leg. And while
Right.
he was in hospital recovering, he ended up making kits,
Right.
and he realized he was quite good at it. So when he come out, he just started messing around, making things, and then from there he started making soldered pieces together and made figures.
Yeah. Yeah.
The trouble was, Peter Gilder was a great man for plagiarizing other figures at that time.
Right. Yeah.
And what happened was he was warned off by Marcus Hinton, because
Yeah.
basically he was
Finch,
copying
yeah.
Marcus Hinton figures, if not casting them. You know what I mean? And but he was excellent. I mean, I've talked to some great people. Phil Robinson was one who I talked to, who was a great painter, a great wargamer, and Ian Smith, he'll be at Partisan with his stuff. He would just solder the stuff together and make a figure, you know. And it was in the time when there wasn't a lot, there wasn't a lot of stuff around he could make stuff with, and he could make a figure. And when they had life about them, so it was fantastic, you know. And when he started to work for Hinchliffe finally, because originally he was contracted to work with minifigs. Him and Neville Dickinson got together. The idea was they would cast figures, Gilder would paint them, and they would sell them.
Yeah.
But the partnership didn't last more than a few weeks. They fell out. I don't even know what about, but they fell out, and Gilder went his own way.
Yeah.
But he was already making a reputation. And I got it down, I had to check. In 1965, he organized the big Waterloo Festival.
Yeah.
And it was his figures on this table that he made that they fought over. You know, and it been, I mean, in the 60s, he used to have sand tables.
Yeah.
Or you had a flat table or dinner table, and you had bits of stuff on. It was awful. And then Gilder came along with his wonderful terrain. Yeah. And people thought, this is fantastic. You know, he was just great. You know, so he was a really talented man. But at the same time, he was a bit of a jackal lad.
And he could nick bits and pieces off other people.
Well, I mean, the big thing was he went to prison. He went to prison, and there's been all sorts of rumors about it. And I've still never got the complete story. But he went to prison. It was to do with, in the 60s and early 70s, if you went into a cafe, there'd be a place where you had hot pies in a display.
Yeah.
And he worked for a company that made these hot pie presentations or something like that. Anyway, cut long story short, there was a fraud or something like that. Yeah. And Peter Gilder ended up in prison.
Oh, right. I never knew that.
And all I know for certain is that Bill Lamon, who used to have Lamon Miniatures, he was a really nice man. He was an ex-policeman. He would have very straight, would have nothing to do with Gilder at all. Wouldn't speak to him, didn't have anything to do with him. But I think Bill was very old school regarding the police, and what a thief's always a thief. You know? Yeah. There wasn't degrees of thiefdom. You know what I mean? But I've got a really old book, which is a history of collecting toy soldiers.
Yeah.
From 1971, and it's all the big collectors of the world, and we're talking judges and at the back, Peter Gilder is going to mention a whole page, and apparently he had a 3,000 figure collection of Staddens, right? Wow. In 1971. Now he'd only discovered Wargaming in 1965. Yeah. So that's how keen he was. 3,000 figures of these Stadden figures, which were, you know, I would like to know how many were real Staddens, but because I would imagine Peter would have just cast a few. So I can remember Dave Thomas giving us a load of figures, these one-offs, and they were like they were from a Renaissance collection at the time. Yeah. These beautiful villages and such as that. Yeah. And he says, "Oh, Peter's just cast these up," and I saw these are amazing. They were from Games Workshop. Right? He just took them, jigged them about a bit, but they were fantastic. And I thought, oh, well, I didn't buy them. He didn't sell us them. He just pirated them. You know, he was giving them away as a gift. Yeah. So there was no pirating, but it's just, it was just the way he was.
Because
But
I spoke to Pete Morby from Elite Miniatures a few
All right.
episodes ago, and he has fond memories of sitting and watching Peter putting figures together and learning from him. And I think reading through the blog, there was a few sort of memories from other people about him having like little painting workshops and passing stuff on to people.
Well, when I went to see Tony Runke, he was a great bloke, and Tony's a wonderful painter. In the miniature war games, in the early ones, there's a photograph on the front of a Red Indian or Native American, as we now call it. With a war bonnet on.
Remember it well.
Well, that figure, that's a Tony Runke figure. And I says, well, how did you do the feathers? Oh, Peter showed me how to do them with a lead soldering iron. It's just an amazing piece of work, and I can still remember it now. And he says, and I met Peter, and he says, why don't you come back to my house and I'll show you some of the stuff I've got. And he says, after that, he says, I was hooked.
Yeah.
Except, of course, that meant working for Peter. So he helped build the terrain, and then he started painting for him. And you realize how many thousands of figures that were painted by people he knew, like a Mark Allen, and Phil Robinson and Tony Runke. I've got a list of them, actually. You look at them. I mean, Dave Thomas painted for him, and Ian Smith painted for him, and in exchange for castings, and some talented people. But I can't remember his name, but I met a guy at Partisan, and we got talking about Peter Gilder. And Peter Gilder was doing a Waterloo in Paris. He was taking the model across, and he was short of some figures. And this guy said, well, Peter says, can I borrow your Prussians?
Yeah.
He says, oh, yeah, no problem. And he says, I had this beautiful Hinton Hunt Prussian army. He says, so Peter took it across. He said, next thing I know, Peter sold it, and it's in America. Right? And he says, I went to see him. He says, Peter, you've sold me Prussian army. He says, oh, I thought it was mine. He's so sorry. And he says, we had a bit of a laugh about it. And I said, he says, oh, well, what can you do? He says, the guy was charmed. He said, well, I'll get you another one,
Yeah.
And he just sold the army, It just, and that's, but I get the impression you couldn't not like him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's that type of person.
Yeah.
I should have gone. John, the lad I worked with, Wargame with, he went to the Gilder when he first opened, and I couldn't afford to go. And he said it was a brilliant week. They had an absolutely brilliant week, and you saw all the stuff and how he painted them. And that's how I learned. I don't know if you've ever done it, the wiping oil paint for horses.
That's how I do my horses, and have done forever.
When John showed us how he's seen them do it, you're just thinking, this is amazing. The oil paints and the undercoats and the stuff. Yeah. And I thought, this is fantastic. And the effect is so beautiful when it's done right. You're just thinking, the guy was, and he just would think of simple solutions to, and quick, so damn quick, wasn't it? You just think, he was clever. He was a really clever bloke.
I did a tutorial video for YouTube on doing horses in oils. And I couldn't believe the number of people who had never seen it as a method. And then a load of people go, oh, this is fantastic, Ken. When did you come up with this? And it was like, well, I didn't. Yeah. It's been around for 40 odd years.
When I first subscribed to Military Modelling in 1972, and he had these black and white photographs, and I used to try and see, and it was Gilder's terrain for Waterloo, and you could only see it in black and white. And when I finally saw them in colour, I just thought, this is amazing. How is he? And he used to do rosy cheeks, which are no way out of fashion. Yeah. But I like it on figures. And I thought, this looks brilliant. You know what I mean? And then when he put eyes in them, I thought, I've got to put eyes in. And I thought,
another level.
Then you finally realize you'll never see eyes, and of course he used to wipe off to shade them. He used to wipe the colours off the arms of the figures. It was just a brilliant way to paint, and so clever. Yeah. And then you realise actually Tony Runke showed how to do that, which, and the other guys. But to be fair, they'll obviously learn off each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you can't detract from. But the beauty with Peter Gilder was he showed hundreds of people and probably thousands. Yeah. This is how you should war game. Yeah. Big, lovely terrain, lovely units, and lots of colour. And movement. That's fantastic. I was going to say, do you not find now that, you see all these beautiful figures painted in the magazines. It's all a little bit too clinical and a little bit too clean, and
Yeah,
they're all
and I had this very discussion actually with Pete Morby when I went to see him, because Pete's stuff, you look at his units and they look like they're moving, and they have a presence about them, and they have it sounds daft, but they have motion. It looks like they're moving. And when I spoke to Pete about how he designs his figures and how he makes stuff, he said that he sees the unit in his mind like it's an oil painting or whatever, and he designs those figures to fit that. And Peter's stuff had that, didn't it? It had that grit and that real life to it, rather than a collection of perfectly painted.
Well, one of the criticisms of Gilder's hinge lifts and connoisseur was sometimes the arms were too long, and they probably were. But the point was, when you put them on mass, you didn't see that. What you saw was a unit of bedraggled soldiers marching across a field. They looked fantastic. And I'm not decrying modern figures because they're fantastic, slagging off painters because they're fantastic. But I don't know, it's a different
It's a
type
different
of thing,
look, isn't it? It's a different, and I think probably going back to something we talked about earlier on, a lot of things now are geared towards those smaller units, those smaller games, where you maybe not trying to get a 48 figure Austrian battalion to look right. You're trying to get 4 or 5 figures to look right in a tightly sort of cropped photograph. Goes without saying that he was the start of the Wargames Holiday Centre, and I think it was Thornton up in North Yorkshire where the original one was.
It was indeed. To be honest, I mean, I can remember when it was announced, and I just thought this is a fantastic idea.
Yeah.
And but I couldn't afford it at the time, and it wasn't that much really. But I mean, what a great idea, to use hundreds and thousands of soldiers on this beautiful terrain, and just play war games and meet other war gamers. It was a great idea.
Yeah. And I think on your website you've got the original brochure from the Wargames Holiday Centre. What a cracking!
I've got the original
memorabilia. That is. I had a giggle when I saw that. I thought that's brilliant.
Plus, I had the original interview with John North, the reporter from the Northern Echo.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
And it was typical of the times. They just take the mickey out of war gamers. They would just, as they did, used to make a joke of it. Well, they still do, I would imagine. I would imagine Gilder would have been very professional about it. I don't think he'd suffered fools at all.
Yeah.
But I tell you what, I've been lucky enough. I've been twice to the one at Yorkshire, North Yorkshire, and then I've been to the later one down in Leicestershire, and they're just great. It's just it's a great way to spend a weekend. I hate the rules, but I love the whole experience.
Well, is that the Grand Manor?
It was. And it's not, it's not the fault of the place. It's just, I never got into this idea of, piling hundreds of figures into a battle and throwing loads of dice like that. It threw us. But to be honest, I was quite happy just to pick the figures up and look at them and then push them across the table. I just loved the whole, to see the figures, like the famous one, the Zastrow Saxons, Zastrow Krasius,
Yeah.
And it was the first thing you'd run and get. Or the young guard, the famous young guard that he painted. I had to have them as well. It was brilliant. You just look at the figures and you're thinking these are amazing. It's just a great experience. Have you been?
Well, I went in a slightly different capacity. I used to paint for them when Jerry was in charge.
Jerry Elliott,
Jerry Elliott, yeah. So and Jerry and Mike were up there. It was Jerry I mostly dealt with. So my experience was going there and going through that door at Flockton, the second place. I never went to the first one, but going through there, and I think, and a lot of people have agreed with me, that experience of opening that door for the first time and seeing those tables laid out with all the figures on, because I'd normally turn up halfway through a game rather than, when you just had the blinds down for the start of the game. That's got to affect the way that you game going forward, I think. And I think the generation of big gamers, most of them will have walked through that door and gone, bloody hell, I want to do that.
You get all these people who are doing these small games. If you could just get them just to go and just even just stand and look at the spectacle. It doesn't have to be, your period that you're looking at, but the spectacle is fantastic, And when he first did it, there was nothing like it. There's been nothing like it. It was just amazing. A real innovator in a lot of respects. And then, of course, when he got together with Duncan McFarlane and roped them into producing a magazine, I mean, what a brilliant idea, The sad thing is, Duncan promised me he would sit down and tell us the full story, because there was a real story behind how that magazine came about. And because the guy who was behind it, I think, I'm probably not running him down by describing him as a very dodgepot. And Gilder was the War Games brains.
Yeah.
And then this man was the money. First issue, you're just thinking, Christ, this is fantastic. What a magazine. And when you read the articles, you thought, these brilliant articles, absolutely brilliant. But every month there'd be these photographs from Peter Gilder's collection. You're just thinking, I've got to have these.
Yeah.
I've got to do this. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, obviously that's gone now, because a lot of young people don't even read magazines, do they? They don't, so it's on the internet or whatever. But at the time, it was just a fantastic experience. And I wouldn't like to think how he pushed on the hobby. It must have really increased the membership.
Well, those magazines, was it 83, 84 when they came out?
Yeah.
First ones. And I was already gaming then. But I remember the impact that certainly, I think it was the second edition that had the first one had some French cuirass on the front of them. I think it was the second one that had the Italian Wolves gendarmes on the front.
Oh.
And that picture set me off. And here I am 40 years later, still painting Italian wars.
I know. I mean, when Gilder made the... I don't know if you remember a later one. There was one where there was some galleys and there was the Italian palazzo and all this.
Yes, yeah.
And you got all these, and I looked at that. I just thought, this is just absolutely amazing stuff, And when you realise that what he'd done is he chopped the heads around and put on Vulcan heads, which figures from Scotland at the time, and then started sticking on bits of Barden onto these basic horses. It was just amazing. He did a later one. I don't know if there was a one where they had King Louis under a shade. He was in full regalia, grand regalia, and there was a big shade built over the top of him to keep him out of the sun. And that was just like, I just thought it was what a brilliant idea. But I don't know if you remember, there was a one where with the kettle drummer. The Neapolitan kettle drummer.
Yeah, everyone wanted a kettle drummer.
They were a work of art, and I just wanted to be able to have figures like that. I never could attain that level, but it was just what an aspiration I've put,
I think it definitely increased the standard of Wargames figures, Wargames figure painting, and Wargames terrain, especially, because I think that I seem to remember from my early days that figures were as painted as well as you could paint them, but your terrain was kind of an afterthought. And it was only when I saw those pictures in those magazines that I went, I really need to up my game on terrain.
I can remember going to Wargames shows, and you'd walk in and it'd have a bit of a fusty smell anyway, but then on top of that, all you'd have is a cloth. You'd have a cloth across a piece of table and a few mirrored trees. If lucky, otherwise it'd be plasticine and a bit of stuff stuck in it, plasticine, and then there'd be a few figures, and it just didn't inspire. And of course, after Gilder, everybody's thinking we've really got to try harder.
Yeah.
And John and I got to mention, I'm dropping down number 6 of the miniature war games, because we put on our very first game at a short Whitley Bay, and I'd made a terrain, 28mm Spanish terrain, and it got a mention for being really well made. And that sort of thought, sort of spurs you on again, you know. To be honest, looking back on it, it was awful, but at the time, it was better than anything that was in the room. So you know, and you try and harder after that.
Yeah.
But I could never ever do with the bases that Peter Gilder made. I've never worked that out how he did them. Couldn't do it. Just couldn't do it.
Yeah, because they're not flocked, are they? They're more sculpted.
No, he used tetrian. And he used sawdust, and but it was the way he painted them as well. I just couldn't do it. I mean, to be honest, there's a lad called Jerry Miller who's a great lad,
I know
do
Jerry. Yeah.
Well, but he spent a lot of time with Peter Gilder, and Peter Gilder must have shown him properly how to do it. But I just can't do it. It's an amazing. I love the bases.
Yeah.
So what we used to do, we used to use Das Pronto. You ever used it?
No, yeah, I've seen it. I don't think I've ever got further than buying some. I don't.
Well, to be honest, it's all right, but it's not the same. And it was the nearest we could get to it. I just couldn't do it. But what a man! So clever for thinking of ways to do things and making it work. You know.
Yeah, it's a lot of improvisation, wasn't there, in those days? Because there wasn't.
I tell you
what,
what,
didn't go and buy a dry brushing brush. Everything was from somewhere else or had another purpose and was repurposed for gaming.
I tell you one thing I was always envious of: the fact that he would use needles and pins for his swords,
yes,
and his bayonets, you know, and I thought this is really clever. But I mean, they hurt you when you picked them up. But the point was, they didn't break. You know, the swords. You know, and when I did my English Civil War armies, I was lucky enough to get hold of a lad who was prepared to do some of the cavalry with the pins.
Yeah,
and they're great. You know, they're absolutely brilliant. But I just couldn't do it. Just hadn't the skill to work with a soldering iron.
They certainly stop people clumping your figures and picking them up in bunches by having pins as swords. I've seen a few injuries as a result.
Oh God, it's another thing. You know, when you think about, you know, you're all these strangers going to pick your figures up at the Wargames Holiday Centre. You know what? Yeah. He wasn't bothered. You know, it was part of the thing. As long as you didn't break them by throwing them about, but he just was quite happy for you to use them. And you know, and some of the scenarios clearly he set up were really clever. And the Pony Wars, which I'd love to have played, they were such a great idea. Although it wasn't his idea, you know, he took it from a poor lad died. You know, he did a thing with the Sudan.
Yes,
and he used the ideas from a series of Pony Wars and the Cowboys. It's really clever, very clever.
Yeah, well, the Pony Wars has had a new lease of life. It's been re-released, I believe. From I'm not sure whether Pete Berry from Bacchus is involved, but I've seen the rules are out again with the cards and everything.
There's a lad, a young man. I'm saying he's younger than me, in New Zealand, and he's actually produced a set of rules pieced together from the old Peter Gilder notes and for the Sudan period, and you know, they look brilliant. Yeah, some of them I've never wargamed with, but they just like the idea of a generated set of natives coming across a hill from nowhere, and you know, it's just clever, very clever.
Yeah, because it's strange that they didn't get published originally, isn't it? Because I don't. Obviously, the Grand Man of the Napoleonic Rules came out, and friends of mine, Richard Harris, who's got a Wargames Centre in just outside Bradford, has got some ACW rules that I think came from the centre originally, but I never remember those being published, and I don't remember the Sudan stuff being published either.
Well, to be honest, I don't think he would have been able to, because Peter would have took them. I might be wrong there, but somewhere else. You know what I mean? I can't. I mean, listen, I've never met the lad, but I just imagine that, you know, like all wargamers, real writers, they take an idea from somewhere else, you know, and maybe he was a bit wary of that, but he kind of followed the rules. But I hated the Grand Man rules. I couldn't get my head around all the dice rolling. It was just so hard.
Yeah.
But it was still a great experience. To go there.
You've been down to the new holiday centre then with Mark Freeth?
I have. What a really nice guy. Yeah,
he is. He's been on the show before as well.
Oh, he's an absolute gent. I was lucky enough to go there to Dave Brown just retired from the place, I think.
Yeah,
he was doing a showcase of his Grand Army rules. I invited myself down to that one, and that was a great. I don't get many invites. I've got to sort of force my way in, but it was a brilliant weekend, and Dave Brown was really good fun. You know, and a good sport, because I absolutely butchered him. I really did take the mickey out of him, but it was a cracking weekend. It was well, he's a Met police officer. You've got to really go into them, haven't you? You know.
Yeah, exactly.
But what it was a great place, great place to go. It was a long drive for me, but it was excellent. It really was excellent. It's how you should wargame. You know, you get a few people together, and there's a big game, and you have a bit of a laugh about it, really, in some respects. You know,
I think that the social side of the big game, it definitely highlighted at the Wargames Holiday Centre, because you kind of chucked in with a load of people you don't necessarily know, but all with a common interest, and 9 times out of 10, with a couple of pints of a golden ale, it turns into a good laugh and a good night out.
It does. I mean, I missed. I couldn't go to the Donald Featherstone Memorial Weekend, the last one we had, but I'd love to go again, just because it was a great experience. And you know, and Henry Hyde comes and he does his bit. And it's just a good weekend in its own right, and it's obviously you raise money for charity. But you know, I mean, I never met Featherstone, but you know, you feel like I've got all these books, and I've read all these books, and you got all these articles, and I've finally collected all these magazines. So which took us a long time. But what a bloke. I wouldn't even like to think what he'd make a modern war game, and I really wouldn't.
You know, it would be interesting to have their opinion, wouldn't it?
Well, he'd certainly give you his opinion, because he was a very, very straight-talking man, which is great, you know.
Yeah.
But I was lucky enough to trace some of the first magazines, Wargames magazines, that Jack Scrooby wrote from America, and Peter Gilder was one of the first. I think there was, I can't remember whether it was 28 or 38 members in the whole world in 1958. Wargames, and they all subscribed to this magazine, and they all put articles in it. And when you read them, you just think, well, this is amazing. You know, you just think from that little start, what it became, it was just brilliant. You know,
where was Peter from originally? Was he from Lancashire?
Nice try. I think I could tell you that. I think he was from Norwich way, actually.
Was he?
Well, I may be wrong there. Yeah, he certainly wasn't from Yorkshire.
Yeah, no, I know he wasn't. It's just I was speaking to Simon Hall, who's written a few sets of rules, and Simon remembers Peter coming to the War Games Club he went to in Burnley. So obviously he then moved to Thornton in North Yorkshire for the first Wargames Holiday Centre. Well, so I was just wondering where he was from originally.
Well, he helped set up the whole Wargames group, and to be honest, I mean, there's some real, you know, wargame giants in that group. There was a guy called I think it was Harry Harrison, who had some fantastic stuff in the magazine, Miniature Wargame. Peter Gilder was from over that way. I think it's because of his job. He was based over that way, and then obviously he moved up to North Yorkshire. And what a great place to have a place to go to, you know, in the middle of nowhere, virtually.
Yeah, Henry Hyde didn't describe it as the bleak Yorkshire moors, and I had to correct that statement.
Oh no! To be honest, that's the nicest bit. I can remember we used to have to stay in this hotel in Scarborough. God, it was basic.
Yeah, Scarborough's an interesting place. When the lights go down and the tourists leave, it's an entirely different world.
Well, I went to Scarborough in November to the Holiday Centre, and I remember going out for a drink in this pub, and I've never seen anything like it. Well, I have actually, but the mutants that were in there, it was just, they were like Games Workshop people, but they were interesting. It was a good laugh, but God Almighty, it was rough. Yeah, it was part of the weekend. You've got to enjoy the whole weekend, you know.
Yeah.
Why not?
Exactly. So go on your website. You've got a video, haven't you, from the Wargames Holiday Centre at the time, which is quite interesting to watch.
That was I think that was sent by either was it Guy Barlow or no Guy Barlow was the young man who had loads of photographs. Tony, there's a guy called Tony Kitchen. He sent it, and you look at it and you cringe at some of the fashions and the jumpers, but it was, it's just a great experience.
Yeah.
Everybody who ever went to that Wargames Centre had good things to say about it, everybody, so that's a great indictment in its own right, really, isn't it? And you were apparently, when Gilder ran it, you were allowed to go into his special room where all the figures were, and scratch, go through all the stuff, and then go to his library where he had all these amazing books, and of course he had the Battleground videos to watch, which was class. But I must admit, he was. If you ever watched those and you watch him playing John Braithwaite, he used to have Garrison Miniatures. He absolutely sledges him mercilessly, absolutely tortures him. What an awful person to war game against, but he sledges him something wicked. God, but just great, absolutely brilliant.
Because it was an interesting concept to put wargaming on television, wasn't it? Because it's not exactly a spectator sport at the end of the day.
No, and to be honest, I can remember having to stop up to watch it at the time, and but I was fascinated by it.
Yeah.
But it isn't, and I know they tried to make it interesting since then. We had Angela Rippon at one stage, didn't we? And didn't we have Arthur Harmon as well at one stage? That didn't work either.
Because I think the only one that really went mainstream was Time Commanders, but that was all computer generated rather than figures. But I remember at the time watching Battleground and thinking somebody else is doing what I do, and I don't think I paid any attention whatsoever to what was going on in the program. I was just gobsmacked that somebody else was wargaming, and then only now when you look back on it and you think, oh, this is a bit ropey. But I think if you watched anything from that time, it would now be reruns of the Sweeney and stuff like that.
I'll base my career on the Sweeney. There's nothing wrong with them, I tell you. But to be honest, I still like to watch it. I like to watch it just to look at the figures.
Yeah,
the sadder that I am, and it wasn't the Battle of Trafalgar on as well. I was at the Battle of the Nile, but either way, it was just a brilliant. The ships and everything was just great, and Edge Hill was fantastic. But it's not a spectator thing.
Yeah, did that have the famous bounce stick? Was that at Edge Hill?
Well, there's nothing wrong with the bounce stick, right? I've had all these. I've had the canister cone and the bounce stick and all that, and I used to love all them, and the shrapnel round thing. That was great.
Yeah.
But
the bounce stick was something different, though, wasn't it? You needed at least an A or a B grade in O-level woodwork to be able to make one of those. They weren't available readily from your game store.
It nearly put people's eyes out, actually. But I tell you the truth, the one I've never forgot, and you won't know about it, but Derek Sharman, who I've mentioned briefly, who had the Wargames Den, he wrote a set of ancient rules, and he didn't use dice.
Yeah,
he used a spinner.
Oh, right.
You had to make a spinner.
Yeah,
and this giant spinner with all these numbers on it, and then you used to have to spin the thing, and whatever it landed on was the casualties. And it took, by the time you made the spinner, you were fed up with the rules, but it was just an innovative idea at the time, It's like, and you had like 3 classes of troops, and you had to look, it was so complicated. But the bounce stick was simple compared to, God,
do you remember how to use it? Could you describe to those who haven't heard of what a bounce stick, how it worked? I just seem to remember it. I seem to remember it opened in the middle and went out as like a fan, and then I can't remember how it worked.
There was to be honest, I should know, because when John wrote us a set of rules for me 7 Years' War, we introduced a bounce stick again.
Oh, brilliant!
No, it wasn't brilliant anyway. But the idea was, but we used an ordinary dice, and we used a Warhammer dice, which was the artillery dice. So if you rolled it and it hit, you could put the stick exactly on top of the troops.
Yeah.
And then if it went through all the troops, then you'd have like the ones we had were red, blue, and green. And if you rolled your dice, how did it work? You roll your dice, you know, 1 and 2, say like red, 3 and 4 was blue, and then 5 and 6 was green. And if you roll the right number of dice in the right color, then you hit. And if not, it could have bounced over and hit your troops or some other troops that were in the area. There was all sorts of complication. But the idea was that the shell literally, the cannonball literally bounced. So you could, in theory, hit 3 or 4 targets with it if you got it right. It was very clever how it was worked. And it was very accurate, actually, if you think about it. Artillery bounces, you know, well, certain cannonballs bounced.
Yeah.
But of course, then you had to introduce, well, was it damp ground or was it hard ground? And if it was damp ground, it didn't bounce as many times. And if it was hard ground, it bounced higher and went, well, you know, it was, you know, the idea was quite realistic, inverted commas, you know. And let's be right.
It would be interesting to bring it into another set of rules today and see how quickly everyone went, this is madness.
Well, it's like the canister cone, really, if you think about it. I mean, you had to make this cone out of metal wire and put it over the top of the troops. And the troops that were in the canister had the chance to be killed if you rolled this. So you count the number of troops and then roll to see how many dice hit them. You could wipe out a whole unit in theory, but it was. But they were trying. You know, the idea was realism, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You know that. And to be honest, when I was reading the early Wargames digests in 1958, 59, 60, they were all trying to find ways to make it more realistic. And to be honest, you cannot. Yeah. Because you can see everything. You know, you can see what you can't see, really, isn't it? I mean, you know, when you're on a war games table, you can see everything that's in front of you, and it's how do you legislate for that? It's difficult.
Yeah, I think there was definitely a drive in those days to more try and simulate warfare rather than today. It's more simplified. The rules have definitely are nowhere near as complicated as they
to be honest. No. Well, I think the idea was to show, look, it's not a game of soldiers. We reenact in war, and this is how complicated this war is. You know, you were trying to justify, and I realized a long time ago. I thought, at the end of the day, I just like playing with toy soldiers.
Toy soldiers, yeah. And don't try and
you
rationalize
know, it. I just enjoy the drama and the color and it's just it's fun, you know, and it's interesting and learning about different people. It's in history. It's just great, you know. But to be fair, you know, Donald Featherstone, he knew he wasn't accurate, so he went for the fun aspect and tried to bring in it that way, you know. And it's only when you get the likes of poor Bruce Curry who really blew your mind with his really complicated rules. And I've got them. I've got the rules. I've got the book. I love the book. It's fantastic. The Napoleon book. But the rules, my God.
You see, we used to that was the game, that was the set that I started with, and we used to play absolutely massive games with those rules. And I remember I was kind of the first generation that were into computers and computer programming, and I produced a little program that worked out the casualties. And that's probably my finest ever computing moment. But we used to do that in our head, and now it's done. And then we did it with computers, and now it's just rolling a d6 and 6 and you're dead.
But if you think about it, I mean, you know, was the movement broken down to sixths?
It was. Yeah. There was definitely quarters involved, because I remember if somebody charged you had a quarter turn reaction time before you could move. I always remember that. You
know, and you're thinking, how long were the inside of the musketry target? You just think, my God. I mean, I was never very good with maths anyway. I think love me thick or what. I just couldn't work it out. And then you realise that actually, you know, you're spoiling the pleasure of the game. Yeah. But it's a great book, and I loved all the pictures and all the nationalities and the characteristics, and that used to cause endless arguments if you think about it, you know. And sit 2 people in the room and go Prussians +1 for firing, and that'd be it. You'd be off for 2 or 3 hours. Yeah, you know, and say, well, you know, these Spanish troops are better than those Spanish troops, and you know, and to be honest, I can understand why that happened, you know, but we passed that now, I think. Well, we're a long way past it. Can you imagine? It would blow some young war gamers' mind if you try to explain that now. And when you explain, oh, well, this general actually wasn't as good as that general, and he's not going to be bothered about that. All he sees is a man on a horse and saying, this is the man that's leading my men. I don't care if he's a drunkard or whatever,
Yeah.
But fashions change, don't they? They always go around in full circle. We'll go back to it in the end.
Well, Peter certainly loved the big game, didn't he? And looking through your website, there was that Waterloo game we were talking about earlier on. I think it was 21x7 with a 6x6 for the Prussians. So is that, if we were going to kind of agree on what a legacy for Peter would be, it would be those big spectacular games?
Absolutely. I mean, the first one he did apparently only had 1,800 figures on it.
Only,
which is a lot of figures, but
I
always remembered, and I thought, surely there was more on there. But the 1,800 figures in 1960s must have been a spectacular sight.
Yeah.
When normally they were just pushing half a dozen. You know what I mean? So to have the ability to put a big game like that on and show it off must have been amazing. But I read an account of the first Waterloo, and Gilder did the umpiring, and naturally the French won. And apparently there was a few discussions after the game about how the French managed to win. And so I think Peter Gilder must have just tweaked the rules a little bit in the French favour, because he was always a big Frenchman. If you get an old military modellings, there's an account in there of his refight at Waterloo, and what he did, he took all the models of the howitzers on the battlefield, lumped them all together, and set light to Hougoumont with the howitzer fire.
All right, yeah.
Right? So you're thinking, well, you wouldn't be allowed to do that now, obviously, because they only have so many. But he had the sense to think, oh, we'll set light to this, and he just burnt it to the ground. Yeah, with every howitzer he could get a hold of, and it was an interesting idea, but what a spectacle it must have been to see. There's a book of war games, a really old one by Peter Youngs, and he does like famous battles, and there's Gilder stuff in there, and you see some of the figures, and they just, even now, they stand up to scrutiny. Against some of the,
they still look good.
Maybe not the top painters, but they are, and you've got to say, well, 40 odd years later, they're still as good as most people's figures. So, what a great way to be.
Well, you've put a lot of work into the website, and you've spoken to quite a lot of people by the sound of it as well. Have you got any plans for the future for it? Have you got any people you'd still like to speak to?
Well, the one I wanted to speak to, actually, I went to see, I'll tell you where I started at. I went to see Harry Pearson, who wrote Achtung Schweinhund. Yeah. And I thought, if I'm going to start, I might as well start with somebody who released a book, a War Games book recently, and had been obviously researching it. And but actually, to be fair to Harry Pearson, when I met him, he couldn't really help us. But I would love to do something with Harry Pearson. I mean, he lives about our way, and it's just a great bloke. But I would like to add some more to it. Phil Robinson I met, it was brilliant. But the worry is, it's a great hobby, and people are starting to disappear. Tony Runke was a real pleasure to talk to. I would like to sit down with Dave Thomas, I think.
Yeah.
But trouble is, he's got some of Peter's stuff in his home, and it's absolutely amazing. And I'd love to get my hands on it. And but to be honest, thinking about it, I would like to do a little tribute to Charlie Wesencraft, because Charlie's had a couple of hard years. He went into a care home, and the last I heard, he was just pottering away in the care home, and he's still amazingly active in his 90s. And I would love to do it. When I went to interview him, it's not even an interview. When I went to see him, we spent 5 hours just talking war games. It was brilliant.
Oh, fantastic.
And when he said about the fact that he had a book that the publishers wouldn't publish at the time, and I thought, you've got to publish it. And he did in the end, bless him. But the only thing was, he nearly made me cry, because when I first was talking to him, and I said, you went down to the first War Games convention. And you will remember that, you had the War Games newsletters. I said, Charlie, do you still have them all? And he said at the time, he says, oh, I had a clean out about a month ago and I burnt them all in the garden.
Oh, no.
And, and, I, and I looked at him and I thought, I'm going to kill you. I couldn't believe it. He said, well, no, nobody wants these magazines, and I've been searching for years for them all. And I said, have you burnt them all? He said, oh, they were just clogging up the room. And I said, you burnt a lot. And that's the trouble, isn't it? Some people, just don't think they're worth, But he was great. He was brilliant to talk to.
There's a lot of history in there.
Well, to be honest, if you got the chance, if you could get it, you should please interview him, because he's a great raconteur and he's so funny. Some of the stuff he comes out with, honestly, I mean, he did a piece for Blenheim Palace,
Yeah,
he did a beautiful model. He was making models at the time, and he did the one for the Churchills, because that's his big hero. Yeah. And I had to ask him, I said, why is Marlborough your great hero? He says, well, what it was he says Marlborough wrote in his diary that he'd come home from just after Blenheim, and Roger, his wife, still wearing his riding boots, and he said, you can't top that, can you, as a general, And I thought, you think, yeah, you're right, Charlie. That's
brilliant. No, I'll definitely put him on. I'll definitely put him on the list, and I think it's great that you've got this website together, and I hope that more do come. More people do spend the time that you've spent, because I think it's really important that we do record this, and as you say, the first generation of that generation of wargamers are now very much into their 80s and 90s, and if we don't record and get down on paper or on an interview their memories now, we're not going to have that chance again. So
no,
a big thank you from me for putting it together. Really, I think it's a fantastic place for, I didn't meet Peter, and he died 5 or 6 years after I started wargaming, but he's had a massive influence on me and a massive influence on a lot of my friends, certainly from those Wargames Illustrated covers. I think it's very important that we do record that somewhere. So the Wargames website, if people want to go and have a look, is www.petergilderalifeinwargaming.co.uk. Is that right?
That's correct.
Brilliant.
That's absolutely brilliant.
And I recommend.
Right,
everyone.
You've taught the legs off us.
Hey, grand. Well, just before we go, and I don't know whether you've prepared anything or not, but I do always say at the end, interrogated you for a couple of hours. Is there anything that you'd like to ask me, or any topic that we haven't covered that you would like to cover?
Well, I'm just looking forward to the invite to your new Wargames Centre.
Oh, the one we have a big
game.
A giant game. Well, no worries, mate. No worries.
As long as it's not modern, I'm your man.
Yeah,
I can make tea. I can.
I'll definitely sort something out, because you've invited yourself to more salubrious places than Leeds, so I think inviting yourself would be an ideal thing to do.
That's great. Anyway, it was absolutely brilliant.
Thanks very much for your time.
Changed.
Thank you.
Cheers now.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Well, that was a cracking chat there with Robbie, and the lad could certainly talk, and he could certainly tell a story, and I hope you enjoyed that, and that nostalgic look back into the world of Peter Gilder. Those of you regular listeners will notice that Robbie got away with the 4-minute challenge at the start of the interview, and that was because my little device with the countdown sound and Detective Inspector Regan failed to work, so Robbie got more than his 4 minutes, but he was going along nicely, so I thought it was only polite of me not to interrupt while he was in full flow. So that was Robbie Roddis, and I'll put some links on the end of the show notes for this on both Podbean and YouTube, with links to his websites, both for the Italian War stuff, the ones that got me inspired to do my Borgia army, his independent War Games group website that he's regularly still posting to, and of course the Peter Gilder My Life in Wargaming. And if you're not aware of Peter and the stuff that he did and in the start of the hobby, then I encourage you to get along there and have a look. And if you are a friend of Peter's, or you've got some stuff, some memorabilia kicking around, then get in contact with me or Robbie, and let's get it recorded, let's get it down, let's get it there for posterity on Robbie's website. Peter does tend to get forgotten a little bit, I think, in some of the podcasts I've been listening to recently, the Grants and Charlie Wesencraft and etc. Always get mentioned, and Peter, I don't know, seems to have dropped off the radar a bit. But never forget on up here, obviously, with the Wargames Holiday Centre in God's Own County, he will be the captain of Wargaming for Yorkshire going forward forever, I would imagine. So thanks for listening to that. Great to have you on board, and hope that wasn't too nostalgic for you. Next episode, hoping to get released second week in October, and again it's going to be something a little bit different, and I'm going to have two guests with me, and it's going to be a bit of a podcast social media supergroup. If you remember supergroups from the 1970s, when people from different bands would get together and form their own group, and sometimes it would work spectacularly, like Bad Company, with and then other times they'd fall apart with musical differences, and it'd be absolutely dreadful. So I'm going to get together two of the social media greats, and have a good old chat. Probably do a War Games problem page as well. And the two people involved are going to be Sean Clark from God's Own Scale, and Alex Sutherland from Storm of Steel. So I'm looking forward to those guys coming on and having a really good chat about all aspects of gaming, big, small, little, big, 6mm to 28mm and beyond. So I'll see you in a few weeks' time for that episode. Looking forward to it. City.